All right, so we're diving into a case that you guys requested. It's the unsettling story of Lester Harrison,
Yeah.
a Chicago serial killer active in the early 70s.
Wow. From the 70s.
And
Okay.
I gotta say, the research on this one, it's fascinating, but it's also super disturbing.
Like that.
So,
Right.
what makes Harrison's case so intriguing is that he was declared insane, not once, but twice.
Oh, no.
First for a prison murder, and then again after he confessed to 4 more killings
Oh, jeez.
in Chicago's Grant Park.
Oh, in Grant Park.
Yeah, so we've got, like, court records, we've got newspaper articles, and we've even pulled some stuff from Wikipedia to try to piece this together.
Wow.
And I guess our mission here is to try to figure out how this man was able to commit 5 murders
Right.
and seemingly never face trial.
Yeah, how does that happen?
Exactly.
It seems like right from the get-go, this case really gets at the whole issue of mental illness and how the legal system deals with it, or maybe doesn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Especially back then in the 70s.
Mhm. Definitely. I mean, things were so different back then.
Oh, yeah.
But okay, let's start with what we know about this guy, about his early life.
Okay.
So Harrison was born in Chicago in 1922,
Okay.
and it seems like his mental illness, it kind of started showing up when he was in his late teens.
Mm.
Right around the same time he started getting into trouble with the law.
Oh, so there's a correlation there.
Yeah, like petty crimes at first,
Like,
which,
well,
I mean, that's something we see a lot, right?
it's a pattern, yeah, sadly.
Yeah.
That escalation from small offenses to more serious crimes, it's a common thread in a lot of these cases, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally.
And with Harrison, it all kind of came to a head with a robbery conviction in 1945.
Mm-hmm.
That's what landed him in prison.
And that's when things take a really dark turn.
Oh, no.
So it's 1951. He's serving time at Menard Penitentiary, and he murders another inmate, a guy named Norman Kim.
Wow.
And it was brutal. Like, he beat Kim to death with an iron rod.
Oh, my God.
I know, it's awful.
That's just chilling.
It is.
And what gets me is that, I mean, he admitted to it. He confessed to the murder, but he
Okay.
was declared legally insane.
Right.
And so he never actually went to trial for it.
Okay. So I just want to make sure, for anyone listening,
Sure.
when we say legally insane,
Yeah.
it's not just like some casual diagnosis.
No, definitely not.
It means that the court decided, based on the evidence, that he couldn't really understand what he was doing. Like, he couldn't understand that what he did was wrong.
Right. Like his mental state was so impaired that he couldn't grasp the consequences of his actions.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not about saying he wasn't guilty. It's more about saying he wasn't criminally responsible in the way that we typically think about it.
Right.
And this is where the whole historical context comes in, because back then
Oh, yeah, things were way different.
they were.
Back in the 50s, like, the whole field of forensic psychiatry,
Yeah.
it wasn't as, like, advanced as it is today. The evaluations, they were way less sophisticated,
Less nuance.
Totally. And so the outcomes were, it was like black and white. You either go to prison
Or you're committed to an asylum.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy, but eventually the staff at Menard, they decided that Harrison was cured.
Sure. Wow.
And they released him
Back into society.
back into society just like that.
Wow. That's hard to believe knowing what we know now.
I know, right?
It feels like a massive failure of the system.
It really does. Like, how could they let that happen?
I mean, it's impossible to know exactly what they were thinking back then.
Right.
But with hindsight, it's hard not to see this as a huge missed opportunity.
Yeah.
A chance to maybe prevent more tragedy down the line.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And of course, his story doesn't end there.
Of course not.
Over the next 2 decades, Harrison racked up multiple arrests
Oh, wow.
for all sorts of things, like theft, assault, even public indecency. Yeah, it's like a picture of someone who's really struggling, bouncing back and forth between, short stints in prison, fines, and more time in psychiatric wards.
It sounds like a real cycle of instability, like he couldn't break free.
Totally.
But there's this one detail from 1971 that really jumps out at me.
Okay, what's that?
A psych evaluation. They diagnose him with paranoid schizophrenia. But at the same time, they also find him competent to stand trial.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and this is really important legally speaking.
Okay, why?
Because it means that at that point in time, the experts believed he could understand the charges against him
Uh-huh.
and that he could actually participate in his own defense.
Right, so it's not like he was completely out of it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes it even more confusing later on.
Right. It raises the question, like, what changed in the next couple of years that led to such a different outcome when he got caught for those Grant Park murders?
That is a great question.
It is.
But before we jump into those murders, we got to talk about another piece of this puzzle, a guy named Wilbur McDonald.
Okay.
So, 1970, a woman named Agnes Lehman is brutally murdered in Grant Park.
Oh, gee.
And that same night, Wilbur McDonald, who worked in a factory, no criminal history or anything, he's found badly beaten, like, nearby.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Well, the police found McDonald's shoes at the crime scene.
Oh, no.
And based on that alone, that one piece of circumstantial evidence,
Wow.
he was convicted of Lehman's murder.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
Just based on the shoes?
based on the shoes.
Oh, my gosh. That's incredible.
It's crazy, right?
So he ends up spending years in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
Exactly.
All because of a misplaced pair of shoes.
I know, it's unbelievable.
It really makes you think about how, what seems like clear evidence
Yeah.
can actually lead to a huge miscarriage of justice.
Totally. And it's like all of this, McDonald's case, Harrison's crimes, it's all happening in the same park.
Right. Grant Park.
Grant Park, exactly. It's like these parallel stories unfolding without anyone realizing it.
It's almost too much of a coincidence.
It is.
It really sets the stage for what was about to happen.
Oh, yeah.
Because between 1972 and 73, things got really bad.
It's like a wave of terror hits Grant Park.
Yeah, as these murders start happening.
And we know the victims' names, Judith Batelli, Irene Kutros, Lee Alexis Wilson.
Each one found raped and murdered in the park.
It's just horrific.
And what's even more disturbing is that the attacks, they seem to get more brutal over time.
Right. It's like he was getting bolder.
Yeah, more confident, like he knew he could get away with it.
Exactly. It's a classic pattern we see with serial offenders, right?
Absolutely. As they gain experience, their methods often become more refined.
More ruthless.
Yeah, unfortunately.
And thankfully, his reign of terror, it ended in August of 1973.
Thank goodness.
Harrison attacked a woman named Judith Ott. But this time, she screamed, and her husband and some park employees heard her, so...
So he was caught.
Wow.
And here's the crazy part. He doesn't just admit to attacking Ott.
No.
He confesses to the murders of Lehman, Wilson, and Batelli.
Just like that.
Just like that, and he gives all these details.
What kind of details?
Like specific things that only the killer could have known.
Oh, wow. So there was no doubt.
No doubt. And just to make sure, the police searched his apartment. They found belongings and hair from the victims.
Jeez.
Plus, they found these envelopes stuffed with newspaper clippings about the murders.
He kept trophies.
Like trophies, yeah.
That's really disturbing.
It is.
It's like a window into the mind of a serial killer that need to relive their crimes.
Yeah, it's chilling stuff.
It is.
But remember Wilbur McDonald, the guy who was wrongly convicted?
Oh, yeah, the one with the shoes.
Well, thanks to Harrison's confession.
He's just finally exonerated.
Yes.
That's amazing.
It is, but it's also, it's bittersweet.
How so?
Because while McDonald got his freedom back,
Right.
it came at the cost of all those innocent lives. That's true. It's a victory for justice, but a tragic one.
Yeah, exactly.
So with a confession like that, you'd think that would be it for Harrison, right?
Yeah.
Case closed.
You would think, right.
But it's not that simple, is it?
Not even close.
What happened?
So in 1978, despite confessing to 4 murders...
They declared him unfit to stand trial.
Again.
Yeah.
Are you kidding? I know. And so back to the psych ward at Menard, he goes.
Wow, that's mind-boggling.
It really is. It brings us back to that whole question of how our justice system handles these cases of, like, severe mental illness,
Yeah, it's like, how do you balance the need to hold someone accountable for what they've done with the fact that maybe they weren't really in control of their actions?
It's a tough one.
No easy answer.
No easy answers at all.
And that's where things get even more complicated, because in 1986, Harrison has this accident.
Oh, yeah.
He suffers a spinal injury, right?
Yeah, leaves him practically paralyzed.
And that's when his lawyers try to get him released.
They argue he was no longer a threat.
Really?
Yeah, because of his condition,
Wow. So that must spark quite a debate.
Oh, definitely. Some people were like, he's harmless now, let him go. But others were like, no way, he's still dangerous, regardless of whether he can walk or not.
That's understandable.
It is.
It's almost impossible to know for sure, isn't it?
It really is. And then you add in the fact that his medical care was costing a fortune, over $184,000 a year.
Wow. That's a lot of money.
It is. So you can see why some people were pushing for his release.
Yeah, for sure.
But wait, there's more.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. So the hospital staff, they testified that even though he was paralyzed, Harrison, He still had a high sex drive,
Oh, geez.
and he was behaving inappropriately with the nurses.
That's really disturbing.
It is, and it just makes the whole situation even more complex.
Right, because it shows how hard it is to predict what someone might do, even if they're physically limited.
Exactly.
So what happened next?
Well, the court ordered a neurological exam, and get this, Harrison's own family, his sister and nephew, they anonymously pleaded for him to stay in custody.
Wow, even his own family.
Yeah, they said he was still a danger mentally because of what he'd done.
That's pretty powerful that they felt so strongly about it.
It is, and
That's
then the craziest thing, his spinal cord injury, it actually healed through therapy.
No way.
Yeah, he was able to walk again with crutches.
So the whole petition for his release was dropped.
Dropped, and he stayed in the psych hospital.
What a roller coaster, this whole case.
It is. It really highlights just how unpredictable everything was, and how the legal system and the medical system, too.
Yeah.
They just struggled to handle someone like Harrison.
It's like he was a walking paradox.
He really was. And you know what's even wilder?
What?
We don't actually know what happened to him in the end.
You're kidding?
Nope, it's like he vanished into the system.
That's just wow.
I know, right? So we're left with all these questions like, did the legal system fail by not putting him on trial? Was he really driven by mental illness? Or was he just using it as a way to avoid being held responsible?
Yeah, those are the big questions, aren't they?
They are, and they're tough ones.
Definitely.
I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts as we kind of unpack this part of Harrison's story?
Honestly, what really gets me is all the missed opportunities.
Oh, like what?
Like, could they have intervened earlier, maybe changed the course of things?
Yeah.
What if there had been better resources for mental health back then?
Right.
Or even just a better understanding of how to deal with someone like Harrison within the legal system?
I see what you mean. It's like a what-if scenario.
Exactly.
And it makes you think maybe things could have been different for Harrison himself and definitely for the victims.
Yeah, for everyone involved, really.
And we can't forget about Wilbur McDonald either.
Oh, absolutely not.
His case just shows how easily things can go wrong.
Right, how a seemingly simple piece of evidence can lead to a huge injustice.
And it reminds us that even though we strive for justice, the system isn't perfect.
Far from it.
And sometimes those imperfections have devastating consequences.
Yeah, they really do.
This is heavy stuff already, and we're just getting started.
I know, it is. And I think as we delve deeper into Harrison's later years and all the controversies surrounding his case, it's important to keep these themes in mind,
Accountability, mental health, all of it.
Exactly.
This is shaping up to be one of our most intense deep dives yet.
I think you're right.
All right, so let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll dig into the later part of Harrison's story and see if we can make sense of it all.
That's good to me.
It's like with Harrison, we see this weird contradiction.
Oh, how so?
Well, on the one hand, he's declared legally insane like multiple times, right?
Right, implying he didn't have control over what he was doing.
Exactly, but then there's this pattern of escalating violence.
Yeah, like he was getting more deliberate, more strategic.
Totally. So how do we make sense of those two things? Like, was he really driven by some uncontrollable force? Or was there some, awareness, some calculation behind his actions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It really challenges how we think about mental illness and how it impacts someone's behavior.
Yeah, it's really hard to wrap your head around.
It is.
And it seems like even the experts back then, they were struggling with it too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Remember, even after he's diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, he's found competent to stand trial at first.
Right, so what does that tell us?
I don't know, it seems like those competency evaluations, they're not always so clear-cut.
No, they're not. A person can be diagnosed with a serious mental illness
Right.
and still be considered capable of understanding legal proceedings.
So it's not just a simple yes or no.
Exactly. There are a lot of shades of gray.
Which makes those later decisions to declare him unfit for trial even more puzzling.
Right, like what changed? What factors might lead to those different assessments?
It's confusing.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that mental states, they can change over time.
Oh, okay.
Someone might be considered competent at one point, but then later on, their condition could worsen.
Because of stress or something.
Yeah, stress, lack of treatment, all sorts of things.
So it's like we're dealing with a moving target.
In a way, yes.
And it seems like the system, at least back then, wasn't really equipped to handle that.
That's a good point. It raises the question of how we approach this intersection of mental health and criminal justice.
Yeah.
Do our current systems have the flexibility and the resources to deal with these complex cases? Or are we still falling short?
It's something we're still figuring out, even today, right?
Absolutely. It's an ongoing conversation.
In Harrison's case, it's like this stark reminder of just how high the stakes are.
How so?
Well, we have the victims and their families, whose lives are forever changed by his crimes.
Right.
We have Wilbur McDonnell, who lost years of his life because of a wrongful conviction.
Right.
And then we have Harrison himself, trapped in a system that doesn't seem to know what to do with him.
It's tragic all around, and it's hard to find any easy answers.
Yeah, no easy answers at all.
It's important, though, I think, to really consider the victims in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. They can't be forgotten.
Their stories are so important.
Yeah, these weren't just names in a police report, you know? These were real people.
Real people with lives, with families, with dreams.
And all of that was taken away in the most brutal way.
It's hard to even imagine.
And we can't forget the impact on their loved ones either.
The ripple effect of grief and trauma, it extends so far beyond the immediate victims.
It does. It really does.
And this isn't just about the past either.
No, it's not.
These cases, they shape how we think about crime, about punishment, about rehabilitation, even today.
Exactly. Harrison's story makes us confront some uncomfortable truths.
About our justice system, about how we respond to mental illness.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder if we've really made any progress since the 1970s.
Are we doing enough to address the root causes of these tragedies?
That's a really good question.
It is, isn't it?
And it's not just about improving the system, is it? It's about creating a society where people are more compassionate, more understanding.
I couldn't agree more. We need to be more open about mental health.
Yeah,
Treat it with the same seriousness as we treat physical health.
absolutely.
It's about changing the culture, really.
Yeah, and recognizing that human behavior, it's complicated. There are rarely easy solutions.
Right. There's always more to the story.
Always.
We spent a lot of time talking about the dark side of this case.
We have.
But are there any glimmers of hope? Anything we can learn from all of this?
That's a good question.
Well, for me, the fact that Wilbur McDonnell was exonerated,
Yeah.
that's a reminder that even when there's a huge injustice, there's still hope for redemption.
It is. It's like no matter how bad things get, the truth can still come out.
And that's powerful.
It is, and it shows how important it is to keep fighting for what's right, even when it seems impossible.
To never give up on the pursuit of justice.
Exactly, and it reminds us that we all have a part to play in that pursuit.
We all have a responsibility to speak up for those who have been wronged.
This whole deep dive has been a lot, hasn't it?
It has. It's been an emotional roller coaster.
We've explored the dark side of humanity, wrestled with these questions of accountability and mental illness.
We've seen how the system can fail, how easily things can go wrong.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
But I think it's important to have these conversations, even when they're difficult.
I agree, and by looking at cases like Harrison's, we can maybe start to find better solutions.
Hopefully.
So as we wrap up this part of the story, what are you thinking? What stands out to you the most?
I'd also be curious to know what our listeners are thinking.
Yeah, what resonates with you?
Do you see any parallels to what's happening today with all the debates about criminal justice and mental health?
It's clear that Harrison's story, it's not over.
Not by a long shot.
It's still raising questions that make us think critically about our society and how we handle these complex issues. You know, as we get to the kind of the end of Harrison's story, I keep thinking about how did he manage to avoid, real justice for so long?
Yeah, it's a good question.
We've talked about all the legal stuff,
Huh?
the mental competency issues,
Right.
but it still feels like, I don't know, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
Like, was it just legal loopholes, or was there something else that helped him escape real consequences?
Well, it's interesting because if you look at the bigger picture, societal attitudes towards mental illness were changing a lot in the 70s.
Oh, right. Like that whole deinstitutionalization movement.
Exactly. The idea was to move people out of those big asylums.
Yeah, get them into community-based treatment.
Right, which sounds good on paper,
Sure.
but in reality, it didn't always work out that way.
Because a lot of people didn't get the support they needed.
Exactly. They were released without proper follow-up care, and that led to some unintended consequences.
Yeah, like Harrison, maybe he fell through the cracks because of that.
It's possible, yeah. This shift in thinking about mental illness combined with the fact that forensic psychiatry was still pretty limited back then.
Right.
It created this situation where someone like him could slip through the system.
Almost like he became a symbol of a system that was struggling to keep up.
Yeah, struggling to adapt to new ideas, new understandings of mental health.
And it's something we're still dealing with today, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. We're still figuring out how to balance individual rights
Yeah.
with public safety.
Right, how to make sure people with mental illness get the help they need,
Hmm.
but also hold them accountable for their actions.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It really is. In Harrison's case, it forces us to confront that, doesn't it?
It does. It makes us ask some really hard questions.
And hopefully, by looking at these tough cases, we can start to find some better answers.
I think so. I hope so.
So, as we kind of wrap things up here, what are your final thoughts on all of this?
Well, for me, it's the human element that really sticks with me.
The victims, you mean?
The victims, their families, Wilbur McDonald, even Harrison himself. It's all just so tragic.
It is. It's hard to find any kind of, I don't know, any kind of positive spin on any of this.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think it's important to remember that even in these really dark stories,
Yeah.
there are still things we can learn,
Like what?
like the importance of empathy, of trying to understand, even when it's really hard.
That's a good point.
Because even when someone does something terrible, there's
Yeah.
always a reason, a story, a context.
Right, it doesn't excuse their actions,
Of course not.
but it helps us see the bigger picture.
Exactly. And maybe, just maybe, it can help us create a world where these kinds of tragedies are less likely to happen.
Well, that's a goal worth striving for sure.
It is.
Well, this has been quite a journey, a
Yes.
deep dive into some very dark waters.
Dark, but important.
I think you're right. So thank you for joining us as we explored the unsettling story of Lester Harrison.
And thank you for all the great questions and comments.
It's your engagement that makes these deep dives so valuable.
It really does.
And remember, even in the darkest corners, there's always something to learn, always something to make us think.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
We'll see you next time.